Welcome to Sola Church Online.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Alan Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers. Together, we are launching a life-giving church in Santa Monica, California this fall, 2021. While we waited for LA County to reopen, we launched online. So this is it. You're here, Sola Church Online. If you're watching on the Church Online platform and thinking of someone that you wish would log in and watch with you, you can click invite in the chat feed.
And if you're watching on Facebook, you can share this to your timeline.
If you watch on YouTube, be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any content coming out of Sola Church.
And we've got big news about a startup party later in the service.
That's right.
But first I thought maybe we should talk about Sola Church's tagline, because anyone can believe and everyone should belong.
Yeah, I think that's resonating with a lot of people. And at the same time, people are kind of curious the origin of that and like what it means to us. You know, church is about both believing and belonging. I think people intuitively think about the believe part, but not necessarily always about the belong part. For people who are exploring faith, who are new to faith, or even for people who are returning to faith, you know, sometimes understandably, they might feel a little bit like an outsider.
Yeah.
And some people may have always felt that way when it comes to a faith community. Others have come to feel that way because of a crisis in their life. You know, they've navigated some disruption. That's the case for us, you know. We both went through divorces some years back and then married each other. And so as divorced and remarried Christians, you know, we know what it's like to not feel seen, to not feel heard, to sometimes feel less than. So if you feel that way, we get that, we feel you. And you know what you discover when you're out there on the fringe, when you find yourself on the margin, when you find yourself on the outside looking in, is that there are way more of us out there than there are, you know, in what we imagine to be the center. And so we began to talk about what it would look like for us to create space for the rest of us. To create space for people whose lives haven't gone according to plan, you know, for those of us that have had experiences that, you know, we never thought we'd have or didn't want to have or that sort of thing. You know, we've wanted to create worship space that is safe space, that is more inclusive space, that is life-giving space. So that's what we're all about at Sola Church.
Amen. Let's worship.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. And you have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. And you have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't turn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. And you have been so, so kind to me. Oh, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending greatness of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I found these the 99. I couldn't turn it, I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending reckless love of God. Who am I that the highest king would welcome me? I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. And the sun sets free. Oh, it's free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Realized he has ransomed me. His grace comes deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. The sun sets free. Oh, it's free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. The sun sets free. Oh, it's free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father. There's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
Heavenly Father, you pick us up out of our mess, clothe us in your righteousness. You cleanse us of our sins and wipe away our tears. You give strength to the weak, help to the oppressed, food to the hungry, and comfort to the brokenhearted. Thank you for all the blessings of this life, the way you love us unconditionally. Words cannot express the wonder of your love and grace, and we worship you forever and ever and ever.
I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. The sun sets free, always free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
This is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. So if you are our guest, if you're just checking us out today, please don't feel obligated to give. But for those who have made Sola Church their church home and who want to participate financially, you'll see a link in the chat feed. It'll open a separate window, so you won't miss anything. And you can always go to the website, solachurch.life, and then just click give. There you'll have the opportunity to make a one-time donation or even to schedule a recurring donation. And of course, all gifts are tax deductible. So for those who prefer to give on PayPal, the email address you'll need for that is give@solachurch.life. By God's grace and your generosity, we're not only able to do church online each week, but we are slowly building our launch budget.
Absolutely.
In the weeks ahead, we're going to be purchasing everything we need to do portable church. We're going to be making investments in equipment and furniture and gear, even something to transport all of that back and forth in. So, you know, this is the time to circle the wagons. This is the time to just continue trusting God with our finances and investing in what He's wanting to do here on the West Side. Every donation matters. Large gifts, small gifts, they're all making a difference. Thank you guys so much.
And so, about that big news, we have an announcement about our startup party.
That's right, we have a date. It's Thursday, July 15th at 7 p.m. So we found the coolest venue.
We did.
The best way to describe it is probably as like a multi-floor indoor-outdoor loft in the Wilshire, Montana district of Santa Monica. So we're going to gather there for a fast, fun 60-minute event. There you're going to meet some amazing people, enjoy some refreshments. We're going to do a presentation sharing our vision for the launch of Sola Church in Santa Monica, and everyone in attendance will have the opportunity to actually fill out a response card indicating their interest level going forward.
Right, and launch team members will be there. Anybody who has previously attended one of our virtual startup parties and anyone wanting to learn more about the launch of Sola Church in Santa Monica is welcome to sign up to attend. And in order to attend, you need to go to solachurch.life, click Startup Party, and we hope we'll see you there.
Yeah.
And now let's get into our time of teaching.
All right, so we're turning once again to the book of Judges, this time to chapter 14. We're in this message series, nearing the end now, called Heroes. We're studying highlights in the Old Testament book called Judges. We're being inspired by the stories of women and men called Judges who did heroic things with their lives. But as I like to remind you each week, it's not just about their story, it's about your story. Heroes is the series that asks the question, what's your story? To put it another way, what does it look like for you to live heroically in this moment? So we're picking up the Samson story in chapter 14 and verse 1. It says, "Now Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife. Then his father and mother said to him, Is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren, or among all my people, that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she pleases me well. But his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel." So remember, in Judges we see this recurring cycle where the people sinned and suffered and until now cried out and were delivered. This is the sixth and last cycle, at least as it relates to the major judges. Like I told you last week, many see a seventh cycle that involves some of the minor judges. But this time it doesn't say that they cried out or that they were ever fully or finally delivered. But that brings us to Samson. In chapter 13, we learned all about his birth. We learned that he was to be a Nazirite. That means that he was going to take a lifelong vow. Normally, this was a 30-day vow, sometimes 60 or even 90 days. But in Samson's case, he's one of just a few people in the Bible who took a lifetime Nazirite vow to separate themselves to God in the following ways. Number one, no wine, but it wasn't just about alcohol. It had to do with also grape juice, grapes, raisins, like anything from the vine. No haircuts, could never cut their hair. So in Samson's case, that meant never getting a haircut throughout his life. That was the plan. And then number three, no contact with dead bodies, which would make a person ceremonially unclean. So to get a little bit of insight into some of the spiritual significance of those things, you can go back, stream last week's service on our YouTube channel. But notice in verse 1, it says that Samson went down. In fact, it tells us 5 times in this chapter that Samson went down, and it basically becomes almost a metaphor. The Samson story is a cautionary tale. And so him going down seems to almost suggest this trend in his life to go the wrong way, to go the wrong direction, for things to not go well, for things to not be looking up, to not be moving toward God, so to speak. But in this case, it's not just that he went, but where. He went to Timnah. Now we know that Timnah had belonged to the Dan tribe, and Samson was a Danite. But remember, we learned last week that the tribe of Dan had mostly migrated north. And so there were very few Danites that were still there near the Philistines. And as a result, these border towns would often change hands. And in this particular case, Timnah was now in the hands of the Philistines. So we see Samson, who is a judge and was to deliver the people from oppression of the Philistines. We see him hanging out with the Philistines. We see him hanging out in a Philistine-controlled town. I think about that story about Elijah in 1 Kings, where Elijah was someplace other than he should have been. And God says to Elijah, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And I think God might have said to Samson, who was in Timnah, "What are you doing here, Samson?" For you, it could be a relationship, and God would say, "What are you doing here?" For you, it could be a place, and God would say, "What are you doing here?" For you, it could be a season of life, and God would say, "What are you doing here?" But Samson saw a woman. You know that Samson's whole life really is a story about the women in his life. His mother was an amazing influence. The others, not so much. You might think that this was an example of love at first sight. This is more an example of lust at first sight. Samson wanted to marry this woman before he'd even met her. Such a guy thing. I mean, I think about single guy who's like checking out a girl. "I'm just admiring God's creation." Really? Because I've never seen you look at anything else that way, ever. Or in a relationship guy who says something like, "Just because I'm on a diet doesn't mean I can't look at the menu." Really? Or what about this story about a married guy who was actually, out in public and saw someone that he thought was attractive, and his head turned as his eyes followed her, and then he heard a voice from behind him. It was his wife's voice, and she said, "I hope that was worth the trouble you're in." Oh man, dude lusted and got busted. And that's exactly what Samson is doing. In verse 2, he went up and told his father and mother, "I've seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife." I mean, this is Samson's life in 5 words. I have seen a woman. This is like his epithet. Now, of course, in ancient times, they had arranged marriages. So Samson is insisting that his parents make arrangements. And you notice in verse 3, they were not happy about it. They said, "Is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren or among all my people that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" Like, aren't there any cute girls at church? Kind of a vibe has all those feels. Back in the Torah, in Deuteronomy 7, verse 3, we've talked a little bit about this before, so I'll just be brief, but it says there that they were not to make marriages with the people in the land. They were not to give their daughter or their son, or to take, let me say it again, "You shall not give your daughter to their son, nor take their daughter for your son." So why not? In the very next verse, it said, "For they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods." Samson was not the first person to drift spiritually because of his relationship with someone that didn't share his faith. And he was not the last person to drift spiritually because of his relationship with someone that didn't share his faith. This has nothing to do with, people of faith being better than people who are not of faith. This has nothing to do with a person of one faith being better than a person of another faith. This is just common sense, that a relationship with someone who doesn't share your faith and who doesn't share your values is ultimately going to be painful for you and for them. But at the end of verse 3, Samson was adamant, "Get her for me, for she pleases me well." So he wouldn't listen, though he later would have reason to wish that he had. Let me just take a moment to say to you that nothing will help or hinder you more in your life than your choice of a marriage partner. And in light of Samson's unwillingness to listen to his parents, I want to add, for those that are, young adults, to carefully consider the advice of those who know you best and love you most. I mean, really at any season of life, that would be practical advice. But especially when you're a young person and you just don't have the life experience, to necessarily see things as objectively as those people around you might, to be open to that, to consider that, to prayerfully think through that. But you'll notice that Samson says, "For she pleases me well," as if that were the only consideration. Some people please themselves. They're a self-pleaser. Other people please people. They're a people pleaser. But then there are people who seek to please God. They're God pleasers. Which are you? Are you a self-pleaser, a people pleaser, or a God pleaser? Samson was a self-pleaser. Now, I'll remind you that twice in the book of Judges it says this. It says that everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This was a time when that's how everybody lived their life. whatever was right in their own eyes, whatever made sense to them. And what God was looking for in a hero, in a judge, was someone who would do what was right in his eyes. Living heroically means doing what's right, not in our eyes, but what's right in his eyes. We tend to feel that, well, I'm entitled to happiness. God just wants me to be happy. Like that's the only thing. If this makes me happy, he would never tell me not to do it. If that makes me unhappy, he would never tell me to do it. Easy. Take it slow. Because sometimes when that's our only criteria, it can lead to wrong thinking. It can lead to wrong choices. It can lead to the wrong results. So in verse 4, it says that Samson's parents did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was actually seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. It's a sovereignty thing. I mean, maybe that makes it sound like the opposite of what I've been saying. I'm saying that Samson made a mistake, and it seems to say here that he did exactly what God wanted him to do. But what I would say is this. I would say that because God is sovereign, he is able to and often does work not because of us, but in spite of us. So in spite of Samson's weakness, in spite of his many flaws, God was sovereignly working out his greater purposes. And so picking it up in verse 5. So Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother and came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now to his surprise, a young lion came roaring against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. So, though they were traveling together, when this little episode takes place, he's off-roading. He's left the path that they're on. He's off by himself. It's a reminder that we need each other, that being alone can be a problem. There's a time to be alone. There's a need for the practice of solitude, but there's a danger when we just go it alone, when we are living our life in a way that's very isolated. In Ecclesiastes 4, beginning in verse 9, it says, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand him. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken. So we need each other. And let me just take a moment to plug our virtual small groups. If you're watching Sola Church online on the weekend, you may or may not know that during the week we have virtual small groups. These groups last for 75 minutes. They're not terribly long. It's not going to eat up your whole evening. But in that hour and a quarter, what we're doing is we're talking about the previous weekend's message with an emphasis on application. And, it's an amazing opportunity for us to go deeper and to do life together rather than doing it alone. Don't be a Samson. Don't go off-roading all by yourself. Take advantage of the opportunity to plug into one of our small groups. You can do that by filling out a connection card at the end of the service. My question is, what was Samson doing in a vineyard? Remember, he's a Nazirite. And as a Nazirite, not only was he not to drink wine, he was not even to drink grape juice or eat grapes or raisins. He was to have nothing to do with anything that grew on the vine. So what's he doing in a vineyard? Like that's the last place you would expect a Nazirite to be. Long before his infamous haircut, where he loses his strength, if you know the Samson story, we'll get that next week, that part of the story. But long before he loses his strength in the infamous haircut, he's already broken one of his 3 vows. One of the 3 legs of this vow. And I can just picture God saying, what are you doing here, Samson? What are you doing here in this vineyard? Maybe you've seen the TV show When Animals Attack. Man, it's a pretty scary show. It'll give you nightmares. This could have easily been an episode of that show because he was attacked by a man-eating lion. This lion had to get Samson's attention. Don't you think God was trying to get Samson's attention? Is it a coincidence that when he's in this place he shouldn't be? That he has this frightening confrontation? And it just makes me think about the fact that if you and I are off-roading, if we're off by ourselves, if we're in a vineyard of sorts, that something somewhere is going to try to get our attention. And so maybe I could ask you this question: what warning are you ignoring? Is there something in your life that should be getting your attention, but it's not? Well, notice in verse 6, it said there that the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him actually, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand, but he didn't tell his father or his mother what he'd done. It's kind of funny to me, the comparison. When I was a kid, I remember seeing, I think I was watching like wrestling or something, and I saw one of these guys, pick up a phone book and tear it in half, and I thought, wow! And I heard that there was like a trick to it that you sort of bend it so that the pages are sort of fanned in a sense, and that makes it easier to rip. Here I am, this scrawny little kid. My parents probably would have been disappointed if I'd succeeded. I couldn't tear that thing in half. But as a point of reference, the storyteller, likely Samuel writing the book of Judges, the storyteller wants us to know that he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat. Oh yeah, like that. As if his readers have all torn apart a young goat with their hands and would have that as a point of reference. Like what? Like how many people could have related to that or really understood that? But you'll notice that he didn't tell anybody. So there's this secrecy surrounding his life and surrounding his activities. I want to suggest that's a sign of trouble. We're talking about when we isolate, when we get off by ourselves, and when we've got lots of secrets to keep, that's a sign that we're not where we should be. So the funny thing about it is, he didn't tell this. I got to tell you something. If I were ever attacked by a man-eating lion and I killed that lion, I ripped it apart with my bare hands, I'm telling people about it. How long do you think it would be before I would post a picture on my Instagram and share it to my Twitter and my Facebook? I'm going to be all over that, man. All over it. But he didn't tell anybody. So picking the story up in verse 7, then he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. After some time, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. He took some of it in his hands and went along eating. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. So again, it says she pleased him well in verse 7, just like he said himself back in verse 3. But look at him come back around to that vineyard. Look at him come back around to the carcass of the lion. It reminds me of Proverbs 26, verse 11, which says, as a dog returns to his own vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. Now, try not to get a mental image of that. If you're watching this during its premiere, soon after it ends, you're probably going to be making late breakfast or early lunch. So try not to visualize your dog returning to its, but it's true. Any dog owner has seen this at some point or another. And this verse is repeated for us in 2 Peter 2, verse 22, because it's so typical of what we do when we're living foolishly, what we do when we're living as if there were no God. Maybe you've heard this before. I think it's helpful, and in fact, it's very relatable. It's called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters by Portia Nelson. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes me forever to find my way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. Isn't that true to life? Isn't it true that we've got to, sometimes we just insist on having a chapter 2 and a chapter 3 before we start sorting things out in chapter 4 and chapter 5. But I want you to notice that once again, Samuel's alone. Now, what about this carcass? What is he doing approaching a dead body? What is he doing making physical contact with this dead body? Remember, he's a Nazirite. The second part of the Nazirite vow is that they're to have no contact with dead bodies. And so, again, before his infamous haircut where he loses his strength, he's now broken 2 of his 3 vows, or 2 of the 3 legs on this vow. You know, he's now been in a vineyard around the things of the vine, and now he's handled a carcass. He's handled a dead body. And again, you can just picture God saying, what are you doing here, Samson? Like, what are you doing touching this dead body? And so in verse 9, it's so gross. He took some of it in his hands and went along eating. Is he eating it out of his hands? Like, he doesn't have Tupperware? He doesn't have plastic utensils? Like, is he lapping it out of his hands? Is he sticking his fingers in his mouth? And then, as if that's not gross enough, when he comes to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate. Ooh, the whole story is just kind of gross. But doesn't that remind you of something? Isn't that sort of a flashback to Genesis 3, verse 6, where Eve gave to her husband Adam after she'd eaten the fruit, and it says that he also ate? You know, it's an interesting thing. Eve passing the fruit, Samson sharing the honey with his parents. Although his parents hadn't taken a Nazirite vow, they still would be rendered ceremonially unclean by contact with a carcass, and even sort of secondary in this case, but it wasn't appropriate for them. And so, you know, a lot of times, I mean, when we're off-roading, when we are doing things we shouldn't be doing, our thought is, I'm not hurting anyone, nobody's going to find out, nothing's going to happen. But what about those people around us who are counting on us to live heroically? And what happens when it's time for us to step up, but we can't, which eventually is the case with Samson? We might be alone when we sin, but we never sin alone. Our sin always impacts other people. Now, notice again that Samson didn't tell. So, you know, more things shrouded in secrecy. Samson thought the vineyards and carcasses were no big deal, even for a Nazirite. So let me ask you, where are your vineyards? Where are those places you go that you simply don't need to be? What are your carcasses? What are those things you do that you simply don't need to do? So many times we're asking the wrong questions, and those questions change as we change. Like at first we're asking, how close can I get to the line without sinning? But once we've crossed that line, we begin to ask, how far over the line can I go without suffering? And after that, we're asking, how did I get myself into this mess? Let's pick it up in verse 10. It says, so his father went down to the woman, and Samson gave a feast there, for young men used to do so. And it happened when they saw him that they brought 30 companions to be with him. So the word translated feast actually refers specifically to a drinking party. These guys were going to get their drink on. And again, as a Nazirite, that's not something that Samson was supposed to do. It was okay for the other guys, but it wasn't okay for Samson. So in this case, you know, he's not in a vineyard, but he's at a party. And again, he's alone, which is why they had to recruit 30 companions. He doesn't have any companions of his own. They've got to recruit them for him in verse 11. Climber Gary Scott said, when your life is at stake, choosing your partners wisely is one of the most important preparations you can make. And I think that's true in life too, not just in climbing. In Proverbs 12:26, it says, the righteous should choose his friends carefully, for the way of the wicked leads them astray. Now check it out. in verse 12, at this party. Then Samson said to them, let me pose a riddle to you. If you can correctly solve and explain it to me within the 7 days of the feast, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. But if you cannot explain it to me, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. And they said to him, pose your riddle that we may hear it. So he said to them, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. So we're talking about heroes, only instead of playing Batman, he plays the Riddler. Now, if he'd won this bet, he had had lots of clothes in his closet. He must have been a clothes horse. He must have been into clothes. But the fact that he, in a sense, by creating a riddle, it's almost like he's making light of his situation. It's like he didn't take his sin seriously. Sometimes we don't either. In verse 15, but it came to pass on the 7th day that they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband that he may explain the riddle to us, or else we will burn you in your father's house with fire. Okay. Have you invited us in order to take what is ours? Is that not so? So they threatened Samson's wife and her family. And in verse 16, Samson's wife wept on him and said, you only hate me. You do not love me. If you have posed a riddle to the sons of my people, but you have not explained it to me. And he said to her, look, I have not explained it to my father or my mother, so shall I explain it to you? Now she had wept on him the 7 days while their feast lasted. So let's just stop right there in the middle of verse 17. In her defense, she was probably genuinely scared. She was probably convinced that these guys were going to do exactly what they threatened to do, that they were going to kill her, that they were going to kill her family. And that would certainly be reason enough for her to do whatever it took to save their lives. But in spite of that, we do see her manipulating Samson to get this information. It reminds me of how, maybe you've known, a young woman who's done this. I've heard stories a time or two where young women have talked about being pulled over by a police officer and getting choked up, maybe turning on the waterworks and getting out of the ticket. A guy could never do that. Like if I got pulled over for speeding and my bottom lip started to quiver and a couple of tears ran down my face, I'd probably get tased, just saying. But I can understand why she did what she thought she had to do to try to save her family. In any case, picking it up there in verse 17, it says, and it happened on the 7th day that he told her, because she pressed him so much. And then she explained the riddle to the sons of her people. So the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. Wow. Samson had a way with words. He just called the love of his life his heifer. Guys, I'm not sure that's going to be your go-to word, your go-to phrase. Here's a guy in Samson who could never make a living writing greeting cards, just saying. But so Samson caved. He could kill a lion, but he couldn't say no to a woman. For these guys that, these 30 guys that at the very last minute pulled out the win. In Major League Baseball, this is a walk-off home run. In NBA, this is a buzzer beater. In the NFL, this is a so-called Hail Mary. Like right at the last minute, they pulled it off. And so picking it up in verse 19, it says, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of their men, took their apparel, and gave the changes of clothing to those who had explained the riddle. So his anger was aroused, and he went back up to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. Ouch. So Samson, he had to come up with, 30 outfits. Instead of going to the mall, he went to a brawl. Now, I don't know whether he took on 30 men at once, like something out of the Matrix, or whether he just found one victim after another, but he got all the clothing. And he was so mad that he left his wedding. You've seen Julia Roberts in Runaway Bride. This is Samson in Runaway Groom. He was so angry that he, in fact, left the wedding before he consummated the marriage. Instead, he went home. And as a result, he lost his wife to his best man.
I mean, we see Samson already messing up his life. And the thing is, I don't think that Samson planned to mess up his life. The problem is he didn't plan not to either. And usually when you mess up your life or when I mess up my life, it's not because we planned to, but it's because we didn't plan not to. And when we find ourselves in the place that Samson found himself, it's usually because there were too many credit cards, because there were too many parties, because there were too many relationships, because there were too many missed classes, because there were too many sick days, because there were too many wasted opportunities, because there was too much wasted time. Don't be a Samson. You know, we've got one more week left in the hero series, one more week left where we're going to be talking about the hero, the judge, Samson. But again, Samson is a cautionary tale. Do not be a Samson. You know, before he has his hair cut and loses his strength, he's already been in the vineyard. He's already handled a carcass. Let's put the brakes on early. Maybe someone watching this service needs to put the brakes on right now. And Father, I just pray for everyone who's joined us for this service today. Lord, we all need to take heed to this cautionary tale. We don't have to make all the same mistakes that Samson did to learn the lessons that he ultimately learned. We can learn from his experiences, from his mistakes, from his pain, from his suffering, and from his loss. Lord, may we look at his story and may we see ourselves in it. May we see ourselves in Samson and not in anybody else in the story. And in seeing ourselves in him, may we really take seriously our opportunity in this moment to maybe make some positive changes in our lives so that rather than continuing to go down, we can begin once again to go up. That's my prayer for me, for the people around me, for everyone who's joined us today for Church Online. In the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
And now it's time to fill out a connection card.
So you should see a link in the chat feed, but you can always go back to our website, solachurch.life, and click contact. That's where the connection card lives. There you can let us know that you chose to step in and attend Sola Church Online today. There's also a box you can click to let us know that you want to step out and participate in one of our virtual small groups. And another box that would let us know that you want to step up and join the launch team.
And if you're in or near Santa Monica, don't forget to register for the startup party on July 15th, Thursday at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
You go to solachurch.life, click Attend a Startup Party.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. We hope we'll see you next week. Have a wonderful day.
Bye, everybody.